welcome everyone. We're continuing our study of Hassidism and exploring the world and thought and really the spirit of Hassidism. We were just talking about language and the power of creating a Jewish version of the vernacular. One of the interesting things about the Hasidic books is that all the Hasidic books many of them are written in Yiddish because this was the language of the Hasidim, and Hasidim to this day still speak Yiddish often. But those are their non-religious books. When they were collecting, when the Hasidim were collecting books on, Hasidic jokes. I'm not sure if they really are such a thing, but it would be in Yiddish, or some of them that they'd write, but most of them they'd write in Hebrew. And they'd write it in rabbinic Hebrew. And so what that means is that wherever you are, if you learn the Hebrew, you could read the Hasidic book. And the Hasidim, they could read the Kabbalistic books that are written in Tzfat because they're written in Hebrew, right? And they can read, that power of the Hebrew language. And so when I was in rabbinical school, and I spent part of it to spend a year in Israel. And there was a day where I wanted to buy some books, and my father happened to be visiting. My father is also a rabbi. And so we went together to the Mea Sharim, which is the ultra-Orthodox part of Jerusalem. We went into a bookstore and started picking out all the Hasidic books that I wanted to learn and study. And there was like 40 of them. And we ended up shipping them straight to America. To the Grand Library, and but you can find most of them on Safari now, but they're in Hebrew. Most of them have not been translated. But 1,000 years from now, a Jew will be able to pick up one of those books and still read it and understand it, find inspiration from it because it's written in Hebrew. And that's kind of the beauty of that conversation through the ages of Hebrew. And Hebrew is actually, because now it's getting more complicated because the birth of the modern nation means it's a living language, so it's changing a lot. But for 2,000 years, Hebrew barely changed because people weren't speaking it; they were just writing in it. And so the way they're writing, the Hasidim wrote in Hebrew is not that different from the rabbis from 1,000 and 1,500 and 2,000 years ago. It's essentially the same Hebrew. They're just immersing themselves. So it's a fairly simple Hebrew because it's not spoken. So they were fluent. So there's a beauty. The more you learn that Hebrew, which is essentially similar to biblical Hebrew, the more you become part of that conversation.
I've read that in Israeli, even though modern Hebrew and biblical Hebrew have differences, but an Israeli can pick up an ancient Hebrew text and generally understand what it is, whereas we can't pick up a Chaucer
easily,
book and read it and understand it, because that English is quite different. Words have really changed meaning. Sometimes they've completely flipped meanings, going from one to the antithesis of what it originally meant. So you can't, no one else can really do that other than people who speak Hebrew.
The Greeks can't do that with ancient Greek either, or
no.
Pick up here and there. Yeah, no, it's one of the wonders as a religion, someone who's interested in Judaism and Jewish texts. When you go to Israel, you see the Israelis, and like a 7-year-old, 10-year-old Israeli who's religious, and pick up the Hasidic book and just read through it at any speed and understand the whole thing. And any of these books, and can be part of that conversation in an amazing way. So when I left Israel when I was 7, when I would go back and go to the world where I was most from, the Jerusalem Hebrew and English speaking world, and you see 11, 12-year-old kids, what they've absorbed. Some of them have read the whole of Maimonides' Mishneh Torah, or read the whole Talmud by the time they're 13, or just the facility with the Hebrew. and the fact that it's such an intense, because in the old country, there weren't that many people, who had that facility with the Hebrew. People could read the prayer book, the Talmud, but in Israel, just the fact of the Hebrew and of it being the mainstream culture. I'll end here before we get to I might have spoke about this before, but I remember hearing about this thing, and in the ultra-Orthodox world where study is so important, and I mean, for me, this shows both the good, but also where it's gone totally forgotten what the purpose of it all is. I mean, the Talmud is huge, right? You read one page of Talmud a day. It takes 7 years to read the entire Talmud. That's how big it is. But there's some children, boys, I guess, who are, young, and they call it the pin test. So you put the pin in into a Talmud, and then you open whatever page it is, and you start reading the words around the pin, and they can tell you what's the other words all around it. Their memory is able to contain the entire Talmud, and they can just start reading out the whole page. And so, I mean, the power of that is then you have people who memorize the endlessness of Judaism, all the buckets of Judaism, and can give halakhic rulings and really impress people. I feel like some of the spirit of what we've been talking about sometimes gets lost, which is we're studying all this stuff, right, to put your soul on fire and to feel closer to God and not just to accumulate knowledge only. But it's created both good things because the Jewish learning has really developed over the last 60 years in Israel, but the people who are studying it also have a sense of this is the only thing that matters in the whole world, and that has a lot of trouble with it too. And I think this takes us to the Maggid, because we're going to start to study about the Maggid today, and that original story where he was a very learned person, very pious too, but Baal Shem Tov, as we said, taught him what it is to study with soul and to have your study come on fire. Another story of the Maggid, and I'll be sharing a few today. But they say that Maggid of Mezeritch once begged heaven to show him a man whose every limb and fiber was holy. Then they showed him the form of the Baal Shem Tov, and it was all fire. There was no shred of substance. It was nothing but flame. And this is part of what the Hasidim were trying to accomplish, was to make themselves all flame, completely on fire with spirit, with God. And so I mentioned last time we were talking about the succession from the Baal Shem Tov to the Maggid, when the Baal Shem Tov died. And the Baal Shem Tov, he used to travel all over. That's how he spread it. He went and he met people, and he went to meet, and he loved, as we saw in so many stories over those weeks, he loved the everyday people. And he found their sincerity, they're so heartwarming. And from the moment where he was a school teacher, going up in the mountains and teaching kids, and that was so much a part of the Baal Shem Tov. Then he wasn't as organized. He didn't create a movement in the same way. And sometimes you don't have, sometimes those charismatic figures aren't so good at creating figures. And Lahavdil, that's a little bit different. Rabbi Shlomo Karlebach, who was kind of like one of the modern neo-Hasidic or Hasidic leaders who had his issues, but he had hundreds of thousands of people who followed him, but he never was able to splot himself down in one place and say, I'm going to create a movement and settle down. He sang music, so he still went around the world doing his concerts, and nobody could pin him down. And so Baal Shem Tov was maybe a little bit like that, where he was, but the Maggid is the one who then took his stuff, and the Maggid had physical ailments, so he wasn't able to leave Mezeritch. So he just stayed there, but also meant he was able to be like a central force. So there's this incredible group of students who developed around him, who some of them had known the Baal Shem Tov, some of them didn't. But one of them said, one of the best quotes, I did not go to the Maggid in order to hear Torah from him, but to see how he unlaces his shoes and laces them up again. But he didn't go to find out, just kind of the special Torah, but to see the example. And this is someone who lived who lived that kind of life, that really powerful life. And so he both lived that life. And I think we all have people that we feel that way about them, that they teach us about how to live in life, and family members, grandparents, or teachers. But he also systematized a lot of the Baal Shem Tov's teachings. We studied a lot of text by the Baal Shem Tov, and the Maggid took them to a whole other level of understanding what they were about and what they meant. Anybody have any thoughts or any questions or anything before we go on to this, getting to our text? What kind of disability? They say he was lame. Yeah. But according to some stories, he was too much of an ascetic in his early life and didn't take care of his body. And he malnourished himself. He'd fast often, and so the Baal Shem Tov was, gotta stop fasting, gotta take care of yourself. And it was part of the Hasidic way, which was enjoy the world, but raise it up. All of life is holy. You don't need to fast. We read that several times, right? So he used to fast and punish his own body, and some say that's why he had this physical ailment. And the Baal Shem Tov would take care of yourself a little bit. It's like his grandmother. Anybody have any other thoughts or questions or anything? Okay. Well, we'll just we'll discover the Maggid of Mezeritch, his character over the weeks ahead, and we'll see more of kind of uncovering how he was, both in terms of the stories, and I'll see if I can find a documentary about the Maggid of Mezeritch. I don't know if there is one. But let's start to go through his teachings, because his teachings are really interesting teachings. And his voice is different than the Baal Shem Tov. In some ways, he's a little bit more dense, but you can see he's trying to really get to what it's about. Alan, if you don't mind starting for us.
Sure. Just one quick question.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know if we said this and I missed it, but Maggid is what? Is it
The shield? Yeah. Well, but no, it both means the teller, the storyteller, like to tell a Hagid, to say, to speak. So it was the Baal Shem Tov was also a title, right? Because it was the master of the good name, and the master of the name were people back in those days who helped people get rid of spirits and made amulets and kind of went village to village, helped them. And so he started that way, and then he became this religious leader. And I guess there were people who were the Maggid, who were Maggid, but it also is referring to someone who could speak to spirits, I believe. And so if you go back, this is really these people are coming from within Jewish tradition. So most people, especially religious Jews who are less spiritual, don't want to think about it. But the person who wrote the Shulchan Aruch, which is the normative code of Jewish law, that was written by Yosef Karo. Yosef Karo was one of the mystics of Tzfat, and he says that he was a Maggid. He says that most of what he received from an angel who spoke to him and told him the content of and all of his other writing, and he was part of that. And so these are continuing really in a tradition, and again they're bringing it to the masses in a certain way that was elitist before, but they're very much continuing a line to Kabbalah. Maybe it's the last thing to say, mentioned a few times, but the Vilna Gaon, who is a leader of the Litvak Talmudic kind of communities, it was in the lifetime of Dov Ber that he put them all in cherem, that he excommunicated the Hasidim, because he heard about some of their beliefs. But in the end, look, they became two sides of the same coin. All right.
Okay.
Let's do it. Yeah.
The Torah is above time and space. one simple unity without divisions and parts. The Torah is clothed in all the worlds. In each world, it is clothed in accordance with what that world is. But the Torah itself never changes. And the tzaddikim, or enlightened souls, when they rise above body consciousness, can touch this Torah, each one according to his level. The higher the world he binds himself to, the greater the expansion of his understanding of the Torah will be. And the farther away from its source, the greater the contraction of the Torah.
Okay. So a little bit dense, but what do you get from it?
Higher the world binds himself.
Many interpretations of it, and none of them are wrong as long as they're based on the original document.
It's saying that, but it's saying that even more, that the essence of the Torah is even above the document. I think it's saying in some ways that the Torah that we have in our world is just the Torah of our world, but there's a version of that same Torah which is in other worlds, just expressed in other ways, which is in some ways it's kind of go ahead.
No, I'm looking at that last line or last couple of lines.
Yeah.
At the greater the expansion. Is that saying that the higher your level of consciousness, the more you understand of the Torah, but the farther you're getting away from the Torah, in that it's both the more you understand, the less important the original document is?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, okay.
Not the less important it is, but the more it's seen as just one small part of a much greater Torah, which goes back to Lurianic Kabbalah and Kabbalah, an idea of the higher Torah, supernal Torah. But it's kind of saying that the Torah that was received at Mount Sinai it's connected to the Torah. The idea that the Torah itself is the DNA of the universe, right? It's like it's reflecting patterns are in the universe itself. And that the children of Israel, when they received the Torah that we still have in our ark, that was a perfect Torah, but it was what they were able to receive from where they were and reflected who they were at that point. But it's saying that you can, by studying that Torah, you can access that greater, more expansive Torah that's up in the heavens. And that the higher you're able to bind yourself to it, the more that you see, the further you're away from that higher Torah, the more contracted your view of the whole thing is. So, but it might be saying that you could see the current Torah that we have within its greater framework of what it's trying, the principle it's trying to teach you. But I agree, it's maybe this is one of the ideas that the Vilna Gaon didn't want to go publicize around.
The essence that you get from studying of the Torah, there's a different, there's a higher level, and the higher level is even more important than the written word. It's what you need.
That's what it seems. That's what it seems to be suggesting, or
it doesn't say that.
What you have? Say again, Charles. Say again.
No, it doesn't seem to mention words at all.
It doesn't.
Well, it's important. You're getting to me, it seems like you're getting to a deeper understanding, a spiritual understanding, and compenetration with the universal powers and God as you go into this dimension there. The Tzaddikim go on to a level beyond. Different spiritual levels. So that's the way I see it.
Well, I think it's that in itself. It's also saying that, I mean, there's some interpretations of the Torah which seem so far away from the text, and you think, how could this actually be an interpretation of the Torah? What it's saying is that the Torah is revealing some very more concrete version of a pattern in the universe that's much greater and more and of a truth. So I'll give I'll give an example from a story. It's a long story, but I was going to tell it anyway. Really, in my mind, a really interesting story about the Maggid and the Baal Shem Tov. He kind of talks about this, and it's one of the classic Hasidic stories, but it's a story that once Dov Ber was studying with the Baal Shem Tov, and they were talking about an interpretation in the Zohar, right, the book of Jewish mysticism. They're in the Torah portion of Mishpatim, which is a Torah portion right after the Ten Commandments, which is really laws about slaves and personal damages and commerce. And the Zohar teaches that parsha is actually really about reincarnation, Gilgul. And so Dov Ber was asking, like, the Baal Shem Tov, saying, well, is it possible that all these laws are really about reincarnation? How is that possible? So the Baal Shem Tov said to him, go to a certain forest at a specific time that I'm telling you, and you stay there until 6 in the evening, and make sure you don't do anything or talk to anybody. Just stay there and look. And he says, whatever happens, is just stay and then come back and report to me. So the Maggid went to the forest, and he found a tree by the spring, and he settled into position, and he watched. And very quickly he saw a man come leading a horse, and the man looked pretty wealthy, and he was exhausted, and he gets off his horse, and he lies down to sleep under the tree after he's eaten and drunk. And then an hour later or so, he wakes up and he goes on his way. And a short while later, Dov Ber looks and he sees that the man forgot his wallet, and you can see it's full of money. And so his first instinct is, well, you have to go and see what it is. But he remembers that Baal Shem Tov said, don't interfere in any way. So he just leaves the wallet there. And a few hours pass by, and the second man comes. And the second man comes and immediately sees the wallet and claims it his own, and he walks away, and he has the wallet. So the Maggid wants to run after him and say, no, you took that man's wallet. That wasn't a good thing. But he thinks, okay, I'm not gonna do that because the Baal Shem Tov told me I just have to stay put. And then finally a third man comes, and this one, he looks more impoverished and more needy than the other two. And he kind of leans back, and he just takes a really hard, needed rest on the tree after drinking a little bit of water from the spring. But then while he's sleeping, the first man who lost his wallet comes forward and sees him sleeping and picks him up and starts shaking him and interrogating. He says, where's my wallet? What do you do with my wallet? And he starts to beat him. And he says, I have no idea. And he thinks he's just feigning ignorance. And he gives him a beating, thinking he's the one who stole the wallet. And the Dov Ber here really wants to intervene and say, how could you do this? But just then 6 o'clock comes and he goes back to the Baal Shem Tov. And so he tells everything that happened, and Baal Shem Tov smiles and says, let me explain to you what just happened. And he said, the first man who left the wallet had a court case against the second man in a previous life, which was exactly the amount of money that was in the wallet. And the money was awarded to him, to the first man, when it really should have been awarded to the second man. And so in this life, he repaid his debt to the second man. And then a third man came, and who was the third man? The third man was the rabbi who was giving judgment in that case and then do his proper diligence to find out who really deserved the money. And so there was a travesty of justice then, so then it was repaid. And so the Baal Shem Tov said this to make him understand that there's something much broader happening in the world that you can't always see, cause and effect and consequences. But then he said, but you still continue to create consequences in this very life, even though it's referring to what happened before. So he said that for the second man who found the wallet, he had it returned, but he didn't go around and say, whose wallet is this? Which he should have done, and so he might have incurred some consequence from not having taken care of that properly. And the first man who lost his money and went and beat up an innocent man, he's going to incur some additional consequences. Then the person who was beat up for no reason, he said all of his sins are wiped away. But if he then takes out his anger on his kids and his wife, then he also incurs the consequences. But anyways, it's a story about how the Baal Shem Tov was always trying to teach the Maggid about, the kind of broader world and the consequences and the connections of everything. Any thoughts on that story?
There's a lot of karma in that story,
Karma.
right? I mean,
It's the Jewish version of karma. Yeah.
right, okay. What you put into the universe will eventually come back to you.
Eventually come back to you. And it's also saying that there's patterns going on in the world that we can barely see, but are kind of helping to guide all of life. And so that these patterns are part of that greater Torah, right, that we're talking about, right? And that if you read carefully the written Torah, then you can kind of uncover some of those deeper patterns that are also in the world. Okay, let's read the second one. Someone read the second text.
Maggid of Mezeritch, Kutim Yikarim, number 54. It is the great virtue if a person constantly contemplates in his heart that he is with God, and that God surrounds him on all sides, and he is so bound to God that he does not need to remind himself that God is there. And he should think that the infinite Lord surrounds all the worlds, and his emanation flows down from above through pipelines into all the worlds. And this flow of divine life is running through him with every moment that he makes, so that he is constantly and continually walking in God.
Very intense way of walking in the world. But it's
a different wording that we usually hear, which is walking with God.
This is
Here it's you're
walking
walking in God. You're
exactly
part of him.
Yeah.
Not that he's walking by your side, not that God is walking by your side or with you or whatever. You're one and the same.
Yeah.
You are immersed.
Mhm.
It's a panentheistic, which God is everything and beyond everything. Well, everything is included in God, but God is also the mystical, right? The mystical tradition says that God fills all worlds and surrounds all worlds, and so
But it's also self-selected because it says, if a person contemplates in his heart, okay? So you have to make that choice to walk within the divinity in that way, to be so bound in that way. That's a personal choice to live that way. And would that everybody live that way?
beautiful. What it does make the intense path of mitzvot really powerful as well, because it works well with it, right? If every blessing you're saying is, drying down from one of those pipes or sending somewhere else, then it goes well. But
Kind of seems like it's a choice. If you're reading it, it contemplates in his heart, action taken by you, and
yeah,
then not need remind, again, a negative action, but taken by you. And then the next sentence, he should think. So it's all actions taken by you to say that God,
yeah,
you're consciously choosing to say that you are filled with God, and then you're walking. So it's really not a passive action to feel that. You have to take action.
Yeah, interesting. There's an awareness out. It's almost like a constant meditation, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a kavanah, right? This is what the Hasidim were really known for bringing intention into Jewish life. Because it takes a lot of work to think that way. I mean, he's making it compelling because it's kind of a beautiful, compelling image to think you're walking around and you're surrounded by all this and you're part of some greater whole, and it makes you feel connected to something much greater, which is beautiful, powerful too. But you're right, he's saying it's, I think he's saying it's there, but you can be passive and not be aware of it, but when you're aware of it and you're activating it, you're suddenly part of it in a way that you wouldn't be otherwise.
There's always water, there are pipelines, there's always water in my pipes, but
Yeah.
I don't get water out unless I actually purposely turn the pipe on. And let it flow.
Open the
Maybe,
tank.
go ahead. Maybe the pipes are always flowing, but if you're aware of them, then you can make your pipes larger and more connected, and you can be, you're a self-aware spiritual being, part of this greater thing, and so that there's your
Or to use another allegory, maybe the
Yeah.
pipes are flowing, but you keep your foot out of it, or you just stick a finger in
Yeah.
instead of, you know.
or maybe just by the way we go about our world, if we're not aware of it, then we're sometimes by accident, we're pressing on the pipes, or we're filling the pipes full of junk, or we're getting this, and so they're not flowing as they should. Or maybe it's like the Matrix, you're plugged into the pipes no matter what, but if you get woken up, then you can start to do kung fu.
So if
Go ahead.
he's saying that it's, you should be constantly contemplating that you're with God. And all I keep thinking of is,
Yeah,
well, that's great if your life allows you to constantly contemplate and study
yeah,
but what if you're the poor guy who's got to stand behind his oxen plowing his field or doing hard work building a house? Can you do
plow out, plow in.
well? When I went and
Plow out.
visited the Mennonites, they were pretty annoyed that whoever sowed that corn didn't sow the straight line. Because maybe they were thinking of God when, they should have been thinking of plowing the seed, putting the seed down. It just seems like
Yeah.
either there's something that a lot can allow you to do that.
Yeah,
Although I don't know if I'd want to be up on a roof, putting a roof up, and,
that's probably true.
having God in my, thinking about God all the time. Maybe there's a way he thinks of that allows you to do both when he knows that not everybody can spend all of their life thinking about their
It's a-
relationship to God.
I think it's a great example on the roof, because that one, it does sound like but I think what the Hasidim brought, which exactly, the Kabbalists were like that, right? They were elite, where they had hours, and when they contemplated God, they contemplated God's 72 letter name and moved the letters around and this, and the Hasidim were like, okay, imagine God's presence is like, we mentioned this a few times ago, it's like that $1 million jewel in your pocket. So even if you're on the roof, even if you're, plowing your field, doesn't mean that you're giving 80% of your mind to God. Maybe it is, but you're giving a certain portion of your mind there, and the rest you're doing what you're doing. And it doesn't mean you're giving all your attention or you're getting lost in some fantasy. You're just, it's there. Just like with the jewel in your pocket, doesn't mean you can't do anything else the rest of the day. You're just aware of it's there, and you're thinking, I hope it doesn't fall off the roof with me. I hope it doesn't fall into the field or it gets into the mud. And you're just kind of paying attention to it because it's so precious. So, and then there might be moments where you're plowing and it's the same movement, and then you can start to imagine that there's pipelines all around you, and it can make your plowing a little bit more exciting. And it's easier to imagine there's pipes all around you than it is to do like some mental thing about the parsha or the name or the this or the that. So they made it pretty basic in a certain way, and said you can still, they made it accessible, and they made the life of prayer. And I think they also would say, okay, if you do follow the traditional thing of saying blessings and of this and that, okay, so you said if you do 3 blessings an hour or 1 blessing an hour, or you look up at your mezuzah as you walk into your house, then that one moment maybe can carry you for the rest of the hour on some level, kind of like a little oomph. It's not every moment you can't be, imagining the pipelines and you gotta live your life in the.
But once you achieve that essence, you don't have to keep looking for it. I mean, if you really feel that you're surrounded by that, what you would really have to keep, you would feel protected all the time. You wouldn't have to keep searching for it.
Yeah, beautiful. You'd want to keep it alive, keep going back to it, but you're not searching for it. It's there with you, walking with you.
One time I was, and it happens sometimes to me, I recall years back, I was out, it was a beautiful day, I was doing surveying work, and I said, what a beautiful world it's got. I just felt very close to the environment and the weather and nature and the essence of being just by being there. So I sense that when I was concentrating on laying out some lines for some sewers, believe it or not. That's it, because I was just in one and working with the other folks and being in unity with them and working well with a fellow man, and then being able to sit and enjoy the fellowship with them after you got the job done.
Beautiful. Well, sometimes you achieve it not by trying to achieve it, but by stopping to just being in the moment, and then things open up. Especially if other times you're working on it. I love that. Maybe that's one of the reasons why there's so many mentions of building the tabernacle in the Torah. So you build something with other people. Okay, let's move to the third source. Thank you for sharing that. Dan, do you want to read? Are you able to read the third one?
Yeah, sure. Might say some things wrong. Anyway. For every breath a person breathes, he should praise the Creator. Mezeritch, did I say that right?
Yep.
14:11. In accordance with the teaching of the Baal Shem on the verse, and he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. Genesis 2:7. Because whoever breathes from within himself, he breathes, that is, from his heart. And the life force descends through the worlds bit by bit, because the body cannot stand too much life force at once, and the life force cannot bear to be in the body too much at once. Therefore, the life force enters into the body and then immediately returns on high. And this is the Havel, or breath. And everything is recorded in the life force, what we are thinking or saying and doing. All of this is recorded in the breath. And when the life force ascends on high, all of this is revealed above in the higher worlds. Like a goldsmith who inspects and analyzes his gold and silver by rubbing its surface with a stone, in a similar manner, all of this, our spiritual state, is revealed on high through the rubbing of the life force in the heart, through the movement of the breath. This thought or action ascends on high through all of the worlds.
Interesting, right? So it's we have this idea going back to biblical times of the breath, right? Or with every breath I will call on neshama to hallelujah. With every breath I will praise God. Yeah. But this is an idea. I don't think it exists in Kabbalah before this, but that the life force, we have this idea of biblical time that the life force is in the breath, right? And that there's a sense, it's almost like Eastern ideas. Eastern traditions have this idea too, that the breath, it's like the breath sends an image up to God, right? Up through all the worlds, and God looks at the breath and can see where we're at, because everything is recorded in the breath and it comes back down and back into us. The sense of the God is like the goldsmith looking at the gold, and the breath is what sends a picture. But I think what part of what it's saying is that there's no way to fool God, right? What's in our hearts or what's going on inside of us, because it's all recorded in the breath, right? In our life force. So God isn't looking at our outer facade. God is looking at what's most innermost, right? Our breath, and there is recorded all of our thoughts, everything is. And kind of God sees that, and that's what God is. And it's revealed the rubbing of a life force in the heart. So sometimes this is very Kabbalistic. Yes, Daber has a lot of stuff that's not only Kabbalistic, it's more ethical, but this was what he's most known for is these teachings about how the world of spirit works. And it came from his own experiences, and created some very great disciples who understood this and lived this. Any thoughts before we move on to the next?
Yeah, I don't quite understand, when he says that the body cannot stand too much life force. at
Yeah.
once.
Yeah,
That the life force cannot bear to be in the body too much at once.
yeah. But there's aspect of the life force, of the energy that gives, I guess, what they would call maybe in the chi, right? And like in Chinese medicine or whatever, that the body can't stand to be too full of it, or it's too much life force, and that the life force kind of goes back out. It's like all of life is breathing in and breathing out. Right? I mean, I say that in meditation, the life force goes in, but it's like the life force comes in, but then the life force goes back, because the life force doesn't want to be, the life force is spiritual, it's not physical, so it doesn't want to be too much stuck in the physical. So, I mean, it creates a sense of movement, right? All of life is breathing in and breathing out and communicating. It's almost organic, right? This is from the beauty of Kabbalah, is that, we like to conceptually, the old conceptions of God are very kind of conceptual. God is there and we're here and there's this and there's that. And some of what Kabbalah and Hassidism too is it's like everything is one organic whole, and it fits a lot more the patterns that we see in life itself, right? The way biology works and the way physics work and the way everything else. So it's kind of like they try to understand spirit and godliness fitting the way everything else works. But just go ahead. Yeah.
It kind of like it's being in a deep state of prayer or meditation, or the like measurable modern way would be flow. They're all similar parts of the brain that activate, and your heart rate lowers. And right afterward, the book from Genesis, it's because whoever breathes from within himself, he breathes, that is from his heart. And if anybody, when you get into that deep state, it's your heart rate slows and you can feel every heartbeat, everything. And your breathing is what's really guiding you in that deep state of hard meditation. And it just, to me, it seems like everything is coming from your heart, where it's controlling, especially based on when this was probably written. They thought that the heart controlled most of your thoughts. So it's probably more on mind. But your breathing, and it's your breathing and your meditation is going worlds bit by bit. You leave, your mind ascends to somewhere else while you make that connection, and then you breathe it back in and then try to make that connection again, because it's hard to hold.
Well, there's also awareness when you're in that meditative state that your breath is the basis. I mean, you're beating of your heart too, but your breath is the base of your life, right?
Yeah.
It's like if you don't want to stop breathing, you're gonna get in trouble.
Until you realize that that's what you're doing, and then you get out of it.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's a sense of witnessing it, which is kind of and it's kind of like the pulsating of the whole universe is happening with this breath, which is a powerful meditation itself. But the heart thing is an interesting thing, because it's true that the ancients believed that the thoughts were in the heart. And we obviously know that the mind is where thoughts originate, but we still have this sense of the heart's wisdom or being in the heart. I mean, and this is a different tradition, but when you ask someone, point to yourself, where do you always point to? Right? You always point to your heart. Just like it's kind of like it's a universal thing, right? So that there's a belief in Eastern tradition that the self of all selves, not that it has a physical location, but that it's somehow at the core of our being, and that's where we go to. And in that place, you can think also from that place, even though it's being filtered through the brain and our modern understanding, obviously too. But there is some kind of deeper place of thinking that comes from that heart.
Rabbi, why is this described as hevel and not ruach? What's the difference between hevel and ruach?
Beautiful. Or nishima, but because hevel is the most basic breath, like the shallowest breath. It's like hevel is the breath when hevel is like it's why it's strange. I mean, traditionally hevel is not it's the basic breath that keeps you alive. So even though we're now talking about the breath like a meditative breath, which is like a deep breath, but hevel is more like it's just like it's really more a shallow breath in traditional rabbinic Judaism. I'm not exactly sure in Kabbalah, I'll have to ask. But in rabbinic Judaism, the hevel is like breathing onto a window in the winter, like a shallow breath. It's not a deep breath. So I'm not sure why. There's probably some classification in Kabbalah of hevel that I'm not aware of, because there's endless classifications of everything, mapping it out to everything. But I'll ask. It's a good question. Let's read the last one.
The world was only created for the pleasure and joy that God receives, so to speak, through the doing of the mitzvot that we said, and we shall do his will. And his principal joy is that a person desires and is on fire to give nahat ruach, satisfaction, before him and to fulfill his will. Because the worship itself is not so primary or essential, because sometimes a person learns because his temperament is such that he enjoys learning. A person also does business because he has a desire for this. The principal joy that God receives from the act of the mitzvot is the enthusiasm, the being on fire, as it is written, "It sacrificed to be consumed by fire, of pleasing order to the Lord." The rabbi said that God, said, "My will be done," but the enthusiasm by itself doesn't have anything in which to clothe itself. Therefore, it needs to be clothed in service. And it is known from science that
my will be done.
like the spring that flows from the mountain and rise up to a height above the mountain that they have come from. Therefore, also if a man does the mitzvot with enthusiasm, whose essence and root is the primordial will that he wanted it so that he should have it joy from man fulfilling his will. If a person serves God in this way, then his actions and thoughts rise up to their source, which is the primordial will.
Intense, but beautiful, right? So it's a really it's reframing the mitzvot in a very different way, right? Because it's saying that what God really wants is the kavana, right? God wants when we do anything, any mitzvah, it's how on fire we are for God when we do it. But it's hard to just have that without a vehicle. So that's why God created all these commandments for us to do. And because then all those commandments, all those mitzvot, they become the form to hold that enthusiasm. But really what God wants from us is the awakeness of the soul when we do it. And that we should do our best to do everything that we do should come from the place that we're doing this to serve God, and that's what God wants. That's the pleasing odor to God, and then it goes back to the sacrifices. Did God really want us to sacrifice, a sheep or an ox? What is God going to do with the sheep or the ox? I mean, He does want to feed the priests and there, but really, what God wanted was inside the hearts of the people who were bringing the offering. And so here's the same thing, that the mitzvot, God gave us the mitzvot with the essence of the enthusiasm that we bring to it, the sense of serving, of selfless serving, because it's not about for our own satisfaction. So it can't be like, you can't also then say, "Oh, look at me, I'm doing this to serve God, I'm so great." It has to be a sense of selflessness, right? Of humility in doing it, so that even whatever mitzvah we're doing it with that sense of alive. And then there's this beautiful, something that's a big theme for Dov Ber, which is that they have everything returns to its source. Beautiful idea. But they says when we do that, we're kind of returning what we did, our own action, we're returning it back to its source. And maybe we could link it to the idea of raising the sparks, which is a Kabbalistic, Orianic idea too. But that when you serve God with the selflessness, or serve the universe with the selflessness, and you're returning it to its source, but you're returning yourself to your source too, which is even more important to that self. And well, the Dov Bear is one of the principal things that he develops himself, which was very not talked about that much by the Baal Shem Tov, is the idea of nothingness, of that the purpose of all this practice is to get to a place of nothingness, not an empty nothingness, a full nothingness, but that by doing all this to get to nothingness. Anyway, so you see how the Baal Shem Tov, the Maggid of Mezeritch, is getting into kind of a different level of things than the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov was more kind of this revolution of these new ways of interpreting, and the Maggid is kind of really getting to a further level of trying to explain it.
It's almost like more spiritual, isn't it?
In some ways it's more, yeah, it's a little bit more esoteric, a little more spiritual, a little more mystical, yeah. Well, he did sit in his house all week long, and then he wasn't able to leave much, so he had to do something.
What if you're not doing the mitzvot with enthusiasm? What if you're doing them out of a sense of obligation, right? Like honor your mother and your father, right? And you go and see your parents every weekend, and you're doing it because you have to check in on them, but they don't appreciate it. They make the task difficult, shall we say. And it's not an enthusiastically performed mitzvot, let's say.
Well, if you're still doing it despite how difficult it is, that shows some good sense. But I mean, the Hasidic approach is to do a mitzvah without that intention is like a body without a soul. It's lifeless. But I think that, it's very hard to do anything with absolutely no. But I think it's true though. If you're visiting your parents and it's it's a very difficult situation, but you're doing it anyway, and you're doing it because I'm just doing it because it's a mitzvah, it's going to be pretty lifeless. But if you're doing it because, well, I love my parents and I love God, even saying I love God and this mitzvah is from God, that's going to make it have more life. If you're doing it because you're worried God's going to strike you with lightning if you don't do it, then that's I can see how that would be a kind of a lifeless mitzvah. But I mean, you're still doing something. But if you're having a bad time and your parents are having a bad time, I'm not sure what you're accomplishing in your visit. So sometimes you just do something anyway, and there is a sense. The only thing I would add to it, and the Chassidim talk about this too, is that in all the mitzvot there's a sense of discipline too, right? There's a beauty to performing the discipline, of doing things, giving to charity, of honoring your parents, and finding but you also see that when it becomes a discipline, sometimes you can start worshiping the system, which is what I think happens in the ultra-Orthodox world, instead of realizing why you're doing it in the first place. Because then you start to just be too calculating. Okay, well, I've got the system I've got to fulfill. How can I get around all the little things? And which thing takes primacy over the other thing? And then you spend your whole time thinking about that instead of being on fire with, the whole reason in the first place, which is part of what they were trying to bring to it. So thank you, everyone. See you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Very stimulating, everybody's ideas, new perspectives. They're great.
Awesome. Thanks for coming.